Welcome everyone. I'm Noor. I'm recruiting at BAF and I'm a core member. Thank you guys for coming. Today we have Christian with us, who's a analyst at CoinFund, and we're going to be talking about how to get a job in blockchain, what kind of opportunities are out there, what kind of skills to focus on, and how to overcome the barrier of entry in the space. So thank you, Christian, for coming. And if you can introduce yourself and tell us more.
Yeah, hi everyone. Thanks for having me tonight. I'm really excited to talk about this with everyone. So, like Nora said, my name is Christian. I am an analyst at CoinFund. We do venture and liquid investments in crypto. And before starting as an analyst at CoinFund, I was their intern during my senior year of college, which was last year, which I just finished up in June. And before that, I was previously an intern at Block Tower Capital and worked with some professors at New York University as well on cryptocurrency focused classes. And in school, I studied physics, decided I wasn't really into physics as a discipline that I would want to do professionally, but so over time, leaned into crypto a lot more and eventually wound up being in the space full time as a profession.
Cool. And when and how did you decide to go into crypto?
I first got interested in crypto during high school, and it really became, at the very beginning, something to do. I remember sort of like after I got my first like retail job, having a little bit of extra money and having fun trading with a small amount of money and seeing how that worked. And that was 2016, 2017. And so then right around when I graduated high school was sort of when the music stopped for the second or third time in crypto's history. And at that point, there was a lot going on, like, you're transitioning to going to university rather than high school. And so I kind of forgot about it for a couple of months and then came back to it again early on in college. Primarily through, I went to Dartmouth College. That year that I started, someone started a crypto club, and I saw that they were advertising that they had just started, and I went on a whim, and that sort of rekindled my interest in crypto again, and also led to my first internship. So over the course of college, physics just kept getting harder and harder, and crypto just kept looking more and more interesting to me. And so there was sort of a slow transition of realizing more and more every day that maybe the hard sciences aren't the path I want to take, and then leaning more and more into crypto, sort of as I passed the halfway point in school.
Yeah, there's definitely a learning curve in crypto and blockchain. For me, it was also slow, but once I started understanding the foundations conceptually, I tried to like focus more on niche topics. So, what is it exactly about blockchain that made you passionate? And tell us a little bit about like the job opportunities and the demand in the crypto space.
I think that the original thing that made me really into it was that when I first really encountered crypto, or specifically at that time Bitcoin, it was some of the mechanics of how it worked, like the idea of sort of network consensus, for example, or mining, were just very, very difficult for me to understand, like to the point where I just, at first, the first read, I just didn't get it, had no idea what any of this meant. And that kind of made me want to figure it out. And so it irked me that I didn't get it. So I spent enough time with it eventually that I did get it. And that process tends to repeat itself because there's always new things coming out. And sometimes I think it's an interesting exercise to just think about having a conversation with yourself like a year in the past. You probably would think, wow, this guy doesn't really like know what he's talking about, because you're always like having to revamp your knowledge. And in terms of the opportunities job-wise in the space right now, it's bigger than it ever has been before. It kind of moves sort of outside of what the market is doing in terms of price, and that's not always the best way to gauge whether it's a good time to get in or not. I mean, most of these positions are paying you in US dollars, so it's not like your income is going to go to zero. if there's a big downturn in the market. But there's a lot of hiring going on right now, and it's similar action that I think if you look back at something like 2019, you would see a similar trend as well.
Yeah, and like a bear market shouldn't be something discouraging for like people who want to get into crypto jobs. It can actually be the best time to build because like maybe you
Yeah.
have less like competition at that time. And I feel like Axie Infinity is a great story for that. Like, look how they're blowing up right now. It's because they persisted during the bear market and kept building.
Yeah.
And people are like,
And
yeah.
Oh yeah, and I think the ultimate story of that is Uniswap that started out at the height of the bear market, and not only did they start out at the height of the bear market, they also had every major crypto news outlet and maybe a few of the big ones like Forbes and Bloomberg as well, although maybe Bloomberg wasn't reporting on crypto back then, saying that DEXs will never work, that they've been tried. They tried Ether Delta, it didn't work. They tried IDEX, it didn't work, and that DEXs will never be a thing. And this is looking back on it, it's the same thing that people said about search engines and video streaming, Amazon and the internet, but it's hard to see that sometimes. But they kept with it, and now look, I mean, it was last year, the beginning of last year or the middle of last year, Uniswap was doing more volume than Coinbase, and all of a sudden, every centralized exchange is trying to build a DEX. So there's always that phase of building when no one's talking about it.
Yeah. Exactly.
The hype cycles come and go, but there's people here all the time that didn't go anywhere.
And like being early is super important. If there's like a niche community that is super passionate about something, that's probably a good indicator to join. It's hard right now to build something like Uniswap because now everyone is hyped about it.
But of course the next thing will be a different technology, right? And there will be naysayers on that one as well, and then maybe it'll be another 2 years for that nascent tech to prove itself. But the people who stay with it and weather the storm can end up, really coming up with the best. They're the ones who come out with ultimately the projects with the most longevity over the long term.
Yeah, cool. So you said, was most of your knowledge in blockchain self-taught? Like, how did you go about that?
I would say that it was just about, it was about 80 or so % self-taught. It was largely self-taught at the beginning because there was nothing else before I was working in the space at all. That my only resources were like the internet, basically. And I guess books. There's not too many really great blockchain books, but I think that depending on how new you are to the space, it really can't hurt to give something like Mastering Bitcoin a read. It's still a useful book to really understand the nuts and bolts of sort of the technology, but there's so many other great resources on the internet as well, from YouTube to just even Twitter. You can learn so much. And so over time, as I started working, I started my first internship in early 2018. At that point, a decent amount of information that I was learning was also coming to me from people that I worked under. So that was another way of getting information, but a lot of it was largely self-taught, being assigned to do something, figure something out, not really understanding it, and then having to go do research until you understand it, and then approaching the problem. Yeah,
me too. Because like, even at college right now, there's no blockchain major or even blockchain classes. And that's actually what BAF is working on. We're trying to start accredited courses in universities for people who are interested in blockchain. I'm just wondering, like, do you remember, like, what resources helped you most in your learning journey? Like, what kind of stuff would you recommend for the audience?
I think one way to get really comfortable with different types of projects is just looking at both their docs and their white papers. I think the art form of the white paper has come a long way since, say, 2017, and they're a lot more readable in many cases and sort of less laden with marketing. So those can be a really great resource. And going through, finding some interesting projects that you think are cool and figuring out really at a low level how they work, or going and looking at some of the big DeFi protocols, and just not necessarily, I'm not suggesting if you don't know Solidity, go read the code on GitHub, because that wouldn't really do much for you, right? But going through the documentation can be pretty helpful, and documentation as well has gotten a lot better across the board recently. So I think those are two excellent places to look. There's also a number of good people on Twitter to follow who you can routinely get just, long form threads out of. And that's kind of just a game of curation, finding a few people, like looking at an account like Sam Bankman-Fried or Xiao Wang, and figuring out, following someone big like that, looking at who do they follow, going through the list and trying to pick out names like that put out good information.
Yeah. I agree. And what skills? Sorry, there's like an echo.
Is that from me or?
I'm not sure. Okay, I think it stopped now. So what skills do you think are most important right now in the blockchain and crypto space?
So this is kind of it's an interesting question, because I kind of have two answers, actually. So on one hand, developer skills, because the numbers wise, roughly 45% of jobs are looking for developers specifically, but that also means that 55% of jobs are non-developer. So on the developer side, Solidity is the most important, but also now Rust is becoming more important as a language to know. And you could even go so far as to explore things like Move, which is the programming language that the Flow blockchain is using, or something like looking into ZK technology and other roll-ups and learning how to build on those. For non-dev people, a lot of the demand is coming from things like sales and community management and marketing. So one of the things that I would recommend, and operations as well, which is sort of like the financial back end of a lot of businesses. So one of the things that I would recommend is, if you want to be in crypto, one of the best ways to be in crypto is to, if you're not a developer, is to still be good at the things that you were studying or doing anyway. So you can take those skills and transfer them over and be in that crypto environment and be doing a similar thing as before, but it's a very transferable thing. Like the same need that you would see in any other company, any other type of business exists at most projects. There still needs to be people doing community management and engagement and marketing and sales and operations and design. That's another one as well. And some of these, the crypto skills, because of course BAF is trying to fix this problem, but right now there's not many crypto related accreditations out there, especially for non-developer roles. So showing that you have crypto skills is more about how you interact with people that you interview with or talk to. And then those hard skills are what you will be presenting first, what they'll see when they do sort of a first pass at your information before you've gotten on the phone with them.
Yeah, totally. And this is very important because most people think that you have to be super technical to be in blockchain. And being technical is always helpful, but that doesn't mean there aren't all of these jobs for people with diverse backgrounds. Cameron actually mentions recruiting because there's definitely a gap between the industry and people who are trying to get jobs. And BAF actually helps with that because with BAF recruiting, we try to place people from our network and like jobs that fit their expectations and their needs, and we try to bridge that gap between industry and applicants. So yeah, we actually have a question from the audience. Leslie here is asking, what kind of jobs are hiring for finance and econ students? I want to eventually move into smart contract development, but your job at CoinFund sounds super interesting and could be a great segue.
Yeah, so I would agree with that overall. So my job currently as an analyst, on one hand, the meat of what you're doing is looking at new projects, evaluating how good of an investment they would be, and then either recommending or not recommending that the firm make an investment in that project. But part of that process when you're dealing with crypto projects, which is the best part, is that in the traditional world, that might mean looking at the balance sheet of a company and what is their price to earnings, what how much revenue are they doing. Those things are all still pretty important in crypto, but you also have to be diligencing these products that are actually crypto products that are pretty technical. And so there's a distinction, I think, when we say, do you have to be technical? Sometimes I think people take technical to mean two different things, and it's not always clear which one people are talking about, because being technical can mean that you are a software developer who can write hundreds of lines of code that do complicated things. But being technical can also mean you understand how those things work, even if you're not directly producing them by your own hand. And that's equally important as being somebody who can evaluate something from the outside and understand how it works, is having that deep knowledge of, I know if this will work or not, like having that intuition. And a lot of that, part of it comes from looking through resources and reading in the space, but a lot of it, I think most of it really, is from interacting with protocols and using them and minting NFTs and using dexes and using borrow lend and things like that, and just interacting with stuff and getting a feel for what goes well and what doesn't, and keeping in mind what a good user experience is like, what kind of protocols are likely to get exploited, what won't, things like that. And so yeah, it's definitely a good transition point. Funds actually are the fourth largest sort of subsector that's hiring within crypto, right behind labs and accelerators. And so labs and accelerators generally are going to be more developer focused. They kind of are more of a mercenary system of having people accelerate companies very quickly, or they might be behind one major protocol and be working to sort of bootstrap other projects in the ecosystem. Kind of like what you see with Solana, for example, where the Solana team is very much involved with Serum, to my knowledge, as well, and some other projects. But then with funds are the next group after that. And so there are a lot of non-technical positions in funds, from the perspective of saying technical is knowing how to write code, not knowing how to understand these protocols and understand crypto. So having that is very important, that understanding. You don't necessarily have to write. I don't write code all day at CoinFund. So it's more about having that understanding. And there's a lot of jobs out there in funds. A lot of funds have grown a lot this year. We've grown quite a bit. I know that a lot of other funds in the space have done the same. And so those jobs are hiring out there as well. And I think that is a really great turning point, because you get a lot of exposure to the community and to people at a fund looking at a lot of projects. And then if you take time to learn Solidity on your own over time, then you come back into the space as a developer, except you have lots more connections and much deeper sort of implanted into the network of people that interact and that we call crypto.
Yeah. Building on what you said, I feel like a very important skill in blockchain is mechanism design. Sometimes a company doesn't really need you to code something for them, but what they're working on is so messy and so early stage that they need people to build up processes and structure things and really understand the game theory of their protocol. So having people from diverse backgrounds is very important. And having people who are too technical can be a disadvantage, because many of these protocols are not very user-friendly or have bad UI, and that's also very important to work on.
Yeah, absolutely. And a lot of people who are very good at writing very good code sometimes aren't necessarily the best at designing a very intuitive product for someone who doesn't write code, because that can be a very different worldview sometimes. So there's always space for the various viewpoints out there that come together to make a good product.
Yeah, exactly. And another important skill is just simplifying these complex concepts and translating them into something that consumers or people who are new to the space can understand, because you can't drive that traction if you're just focused on a super niche community that is technical. It's important to have that skill, even for content creators, if you can create content that brings more people to the space, by being able to have a full grasp of these concepts while communicating them in like more simple ways, I think that can also be a very important skill.
Yeah, and I think if your calling is being sort of an evangelist for blockchain, that I think that's really going to become a big deal in the next few years. We've already seen with how the way that FTX, for example, has really expanded their marketing efforts. I would expect that that kind of action is going to take place in a lot of different places, and that's going to require a lot of people to sort of bring crypto to the masses. Um, Most people out in the outside world really just still don't get it. And there's a bigger population of people who have wrapped their heads around Bitcoin, but now you put DeFi, for example, on the table, and that is just bringing most people back to square one right away. Seemingly, some people like Mark Cuban seem to have picked it up quite quickly, but you can't expect everyone to do that. And so there's always going to be a need for evangelizing these protocols because there's just such a lack of not just education, but sort of the marketing that doesn't appeal to us, but appeals to those people out there on the street. And it's growing and it's coming in every day. Every time I'm in a city anywhere in the US now, I feel like I see a lot of crypto ads, like in subways and stuff. But
Yeah.
so it's growing, but that's also going to be a big area of need, is going to be on the marketing front. And to be an effective marketer in crypto, you can't just be someone who knows how to do marketing. You also have to understand what you're marketing on a deeper level. And so that's where having been in crypto already, even if it's as a side thing, really comes in handy. And I think that for most people, if you've been in the space for a few months to a couple of years, within half an hour of talking, someone will be able to know that you know what you're talking about.
Yeah, that's very true. And it's important to surround yourself with the right community. Like right now with Discord democratizing access to that, I think the best way to learn is to just join communities online. And being in a passionate community can be a game changer in your crypto journey. Also Twitter.
Yeah, Twitter and Discord are very, very important. And I've noticed that Discord is getting more important now than it seemed to have been before. But one of the things that I've experienced in my day-to-day life, at least in my job, is that when I encounter problems, if I'm trying to do something with a particular protocol and it's not working, or something is just not working properly, or I want to just find out about something just out of curiosity, typically when you join a Discord and you start asking questions, someone shows up almost immediately and starts answering them for you. So there's it shouldn't be something that you should get too intimidated by. It seems like most communities that I've been through are really interested in just connecting with more people, because it's good for them if more people know about what they're doing. And there's always opportunities to learn more in that kind of way. And for some people, that's the ideal way they learn, is sort of a more Socratic method of conversing rather than just being presented with papers. So that's also a very effective way to both get deeper into a community that you care about, and also just pull in a ton more information that can really benefit yourself.
Yeah. And like another thing in crypto is how open source it is, and that culture can really help you get a job in crypto, because if you like join a community and you volunteer to code something like an open source project, that can definitely increase your chances of getting like a blockchain job. Because like how experience, there are no experts in blockchain. You can't have 10 years in blockchain. It's mainly like you can find people to build things with in those communities, and I feel like that's like how most people get jobs in blockchains, by building especially open source projects.
Yeah, for developers, absolutely. And there's lots of cool resources now, like Gitcoin. So you can go do bounties for projects, and if you build up a repertoire of having completed even small ones, then that's a great way to get embedded there. That was the same advice that was given to me at one point when I wasn't sure if I wanted to pursue more of a software development path. And try to build up to being like a Bitcoin core dev or something like that, the recommendation was always, even if it's updating documentation, fill those pull requests. And over time, what you'll do will become slowly and slowly more complicated, and people will come to accept you more as you sort of prove yourself a little bit more in that community. And I guess on that too, if you speak a second language, translation is another thing that is often a very basic necessity of a lot of projects. So that's another way to benefit a project and increase its accessibility and its ability to include as many people as possible. And also another way to get involved with the community if you happen to be bilingual.
Yeah, that's actually very cool. I've been thinking about that because my first language is Arabic and my second is French, and I almost never find like quality content in blockchain in my first two languages. And there's definitely a need to like democratize access to knowledge, because it's super, I feel like knowledge in blockchain is super centralized, and we need to work on that. And it's very helpful how there are whole systems to reward these contributions, like in DAOs, for example. If you translate a DAO's documentation, you can submit a proposal and people will vote, and like you get rewarded. So yeah, that brings a very important point.
Yeah, it's definitely in any language. Even if if you speak Spanish, you might think, wow, well, maybe a lot of people speak Spanish and are already translating. I think that the need for translated documentation and websites and community info and stuff like that in any language, no matter what it is, far outstrips the amount of people actually doing it right now. Because that's difficult to do in any case, any type of technology. And that's a great way to wind up in a community and helping expand their community by bringing in access to a whole other group of people who previously couldn't address the content.
Yeah, exactly. What other non-technical positions are emerging right now in blockchain?
I think a big one that we're seeing a lot of is traditional finance building out their crypto sort of capabilities. And so I've noticed, you'll see it in headlines over the last few months, that a lot of like bigger banks and traditional institutions have been either opening up research teams into crypto or doing something along those lines. Usually it's very early stage stuff, sort of early on in the process, but that's somewhere I've seen a lot of expansion. And another area that is hiring like crazy right now is exchanges. And so exchanges have all kinds of positions. A lot of them are very big companies. They have, beyond sort of back-end developers, which, yeah, there is a need for that. There's also things like technical writing, which is another type of job that falls between being a dev and not. And then things like working in their operations types of departments. That's another one. And exchanges right now are by far hiring for the most singular positions of a singular firm. So I believe Kraken right now has the most numbers, the highest number of open positions at the moment, for example, and Binance follows them up pretty closely.
Yeah. It's true that there are many. Sorry, the echo is back. Can you hear it?
I can hear. It's very quiet. I'm not sure if it's carrying over to the listeners too much.
Yeah.
I do hear it, but it's quite subtle. I don't know if someone could drop in the chat if it's really annoying or not. That would be helpful.
I think it's gone. Okay.
Yeah, it seems to be gone again.
And it only happens to me. It's so weird. Anyways, so I was saying it's true that there are many, like, there's more demand and there are more job offerings, but it's also, you also gotta be skeptical and careful, because many companies are kind of scamming, and there are many shit coins and many shit projects, and you have to be careful of that. So how do you choose the right company in blockchain?
Well, part of it is doing sort of a pretty standard due diligence process on companies. And generally speaking, you're going to be going through at least 2 rounds of interviews, if not more. In the crypto space, I've gone through up to 4 or 5 rounds of interviews with companies, and that'll give you a lot of time to sort of meet multiple people on the team and have an understanding of what they do, what they're about, how much longevity do you think they'll have. And one part of that is do you think that they're fraudulent or not, which you have to figure out. And then another part of that is oh, Cameron, if you could also drop jobs.coinfund.io there as well. Oh, you already put it there. Okay, cool, thanks. So there's that aspect of it. And then there's also the other aspect, which is, do you think they'll survive? Like, what if the market draws down 80% tomorrow? Will they be here? And so that's another aspect that you have to assess. I think that you should decide your risk appetite beforehand. So you can make a safe bet going to a big exchange. If you can get a job there, they're going to be around. They generally don't just disappear. Smaller exchanges will, but the likes of Binance and FTX are a lot safer. But if you're looking at a small project that's very new, has like 5 anonymous team members, that's a risky bet. But the other side of that is that hiring for a community manager position doesn't necessarily have to become your full-time job. A lot of projects, especially before major raises, have a lot of people involved with them who are almost like side hustlers more than they are like full-blown employees when these projects have less capital. So that can be another way of sort of dipping in and understanding what they're about, and spending time in their community as well, because what the community thinks of the project ultimately is probably the most important factor. If you look through their Discord, like, what are the conversations like? Are there people talking about, I'm trying to build this on this project, for example, if we're talking about just a layer 1 blockchain, is the conversation centering around, I have a problem with my smart contract I'm trying to deploy, or how would I get this to work properly? Or is the conversation more, is it about building, or is it about sort of just like, can I buy a lot of these tokens and then sell them later? So looking at what the community does and what kind of attention it gets in their Discord and in their Telegram is a good way to, I think, diligence a project as well.
I think networking is also super helpful because many of these jobs are not even posted on LinkedIn. Most of the crypto and blockchain jobs are communicated within like the blockchain circle.
Yeah, so it can be tough in the search, and that's why a lot of the research I did that's presented in the audio blog, it uses cryptocurrencyjobs.co. I'm not affiliated with that website. I don't know those people, but they have the aspect of that website which is nice is that they only aggregate crypto jobs, and elsewhere a lot of other stuff slips in when you do crypto related searches. But yeah, you have to look in multiple places. That's one of the other things I would highly recommend, is go through, you can use Google has a pretty good job search engine, to be honest, but then there's also Glassdoor and LinkedIn, cryptocurrency jobs, and several other websites that are just like standard job search websites that are helpful to look through. And then keep your eye on Twitter as well. I actually got an internship last summer through Twitter, and that was because I just by chance happened upon Stephen Lavera, I think, who is in Australia, retweeting Christopher Allen, and then I DM'd him and said, I see that you're hiring interns. I would like to be one of your interns. And then from there, interviewing and eventually getting it. So keeping an eye to Twitter as well is a good way of going about it. And that's not the only case that I've seen of people posting, hey, I want an intern, or I want interns. So if you're still in school, that can be another great way of going about it. Yeah. I see it more for internships than full-time jobs, but I'm starting to see more people advertise on Twitter for full-time jobs too.
For sure, yeah. It's a lot of cold emailing. And also going to events and meetups. You could like meet someone recruiting and then just reach out. Like in the last BAF meeting, the person working on recruiting for the Index Co-op internship, which is something I'm interested in, was in the meetup, and I directly talked to him about what they're looking for, how can I build a better profile for that internship. So going to conferences and events can also be super helpful.
Oh yeah, and there's most major cities in the United States at least have a pretty decent amount of crypto related meetups. Typically, you're going to see that there's like the coin specific ones, like the Bitcoin meetup, the Ethereum meetup, Zcash meetup, or something like that. And then there's also more general ones or vertical specific ones as well that happen. Just the other day, I was at the DAO meetup in New York and actually ran into Noel there, which was pretty funny.
Cool.
But yeah, that's a great place to be as well. And there are a ton of people there working in the space, doing various projects. And it's like now that these kinds of things are starting to happen again in person, I would definitely really recommend you check out what's going on in the nearest city to you, because the events are fun to go to, and generally people are very friendly, and it's just a good time. But then also you're connecting with a ton of people in the space, and even though all of us are pretty internet native at this point and pretty used to connecting like this through screens or through Twitter or something, I think there really is something that you lose out on as opposed to face-to-face communication. So going and taking that opportunity to really can be helpful as well.
Yeah. But what about people in like other countries where blockchain might not be that common? Like where I come from, I'm from Tunisia, and I only know one other person who's also into blockchain, like in my surroundings. So not having access to those in-person opportunities should not like discourage you, because like most of
No.
the online opportunities can be equally as enriching and equally as helpful.
Well, first of all, crypto is online first, so anything that's happening in the real world is a nice bonus, but it's not the be all end all of the process. And crypto companies now are all remote basically, but even before the pandemic started, there were a lot of companies in crypto that were fully remote. Kraken has been fully remote for like 10 years. CoinGecko and CoinMarketCap are both fully remote, as an example. And these companies have been around for 5+ years. And so they're very used to incorporating people from outside of their time zone or outside of their country. It's something that's totally possible. And one of the nice things about crypto is that I think that in general, there's a lot of an eye towards, if you can do the job, then people will appreciate you for that. And it's okay if, no matter what part of the world you're in, if you have the skill set that matches what they want, then they'll be interested in you. So yeah, I wouldn't be discouraged at all, no matter where you are. Absolutely, because there's so many. And now, like, I think crypto would be the last industry to ever really transition back to having office space, because people are already used to being online all the time, and this just makes it cheaper and easier for everyone to continue their work and doing what they do.
And the new generation is all about remote work.
Yeah. But yeah, don't be discouraged by your location. Geography hasn't been a boundary to crypto, and it never will be, most likely.
Yeah.
Well, for hiring at least. Maybe for mining, it's a different story. But
yeah, that's true. Which it's something that they're working on, I guess. I mean, crypto has been around for like not that long.
Yeah.
So, we have a question in the chat. Bill is asking, what do you think about the crypto clubs on Clubhouse?
I think that it seems like a lot of the interesting Clubhouses moved back to Twitter, because Twitter has those Twitter Spaces now.
Yeah.
So yeah, both are great, and I can see that the hype died down a little bit around Clubhouse, but it seems like there's still a lot of users on there. So still definitely a good venue. My experience with Clubhouse was that it was hard to find rooms that were medium-sized. So I had an easy time finding a room with someone who happens to be famous in the crypto sphere, but then they have 100 people in the room, and it's hard to speak in those. And then a lot of rooms with 3 random people that you may or may not want to join. But if you look around, you can find sort of those nice sweet spot rooms that might be more of an engaging conversation. And I think that they're worthwhile of checking out. It's not like the primary place that I would spend my time. I think that there's just a lot more going on Twitter, and the Twitter space trend now has like really sucked people back, because now instead of having to transition between two apps, people can just use one.
Yeah.
Which is a much simpler solution for most.
Totally. I feel like the added this echo is so annoying. Okay, I feel like the added value of Clubhouse was how exclusive it was, but the more crowded it became, the less value people were taking out of it.
Yeah, and it had to do that eventually. Like, you can't have an app with only 10,000 users, last forever. So that was coming, but it was a very cool idea, and clearly it's being copied by others. So they did something right.
I guess, yeah, that's true. So what other online communities would you recommend in crypto?
In terms of platform, I think that the best right now is Twitter, Discord, and Reddit, and Telegram also. Joining Telegram groups can be helpful as well. They're a lot to manage. Your phone will be blowing up all day if you're just in a handful. But those are also very useful. And I found that reaching out to people directly through Twitter also works pretty well. And just building up a network of individuals that you can talk to occasionally. Not necessarily to get something out of somebody, but just as a way of sharing information and ideas and learning from one another. So really getting a feel for those. But right now, Twitter is such a gravity well of engagement in the crypto space, and everything else is like a minor moon orbiting sort of this big center of mass.
Yeah, that's true. What are your favorite crypto Twitter accounts?
I've been really having a good time following. I mean, Suju and Xiao Wang are, I think, two great accounts in terms of insight, and some of the more trolly accounts I've also really enjoyed following. And yeah, like I would say, steer clear of like crazy maxi accounts and look for people who have a more holistic view of crypto. I think DeSFi has been really engaged recently, which is so like he's always in a Twitter space like all day basically. So that's someone who's always putting out information. And it can take a long time to sort of build up like a list of people that are sort of like good sources of information, both for like a jobs recent, and also like just market color on the market in general. But I would highly recommend also using lists in Twitter to like manage that, because you can get out of it very quickly.
I think you brought up something really important. Like, really avoid people who are not too passionate, but like too strict about their opinions. Like, if someone is defending aggressively just one coin or one protocol, even when it's clearly flawed, that's a big red flag.
Yeah, be careful of getting sucked into maximalism. It's not helpful in a job interview to sound like a maxi of anything.
Yeah.
And unless you're interviewing at like, a development lab that only works on Bitcoin Core or something like that, then it might be helpful to say something like that. But in general, you really want to have a holistic and chain agnostic view. I think that, if you don't have that view, if you genuinely believe that like your platform of choice is going to be the one and only future, then that's okay. And that's like a perfectly valid opinion. But I think in terms of hiring, what most people do not want to hear a candidate say something along those lines. It's just not what most places are looking for. And it's becoming now a reality that every project and exchange and fund is going to have the capacity to understand and support a large ecosystem of different platforms that are all pretty successful sort of in parallel to one another. And so having an understanding of the fact that there is like a wider ecosystem out there beyond Bitcoin and Ethereum, for example, or whatever platform you want to sort of wrap yourself up in, is definitely a very important very important thing to sort of understand.
Yeah, that's very true. We have another question in the chat. It says, what about jobs that actively disrupt traditional financial instruments by creating smart contract protocols, specifically countries that are lenient, if not entirely ignorant about blockchain?
So I think that in terms of from the protocol side, so I take that to mean something like borrow lend, or something along those lines. A lot of those teams are largely based in the United States, but they also have a global component to them. And because they're deploying smart contracts and not operating, futures and other derivative type products on a centralized server, the jurisdiction aspect of it matters less. Countries typically are trying to prevent these platforms from operating, not prevent them from hiring people. So unless the country you live in is particularly authoritarian, that probably wouldn't pose too much of an issue to you. However, so the main thing there is that it's right now very hard for, or at least it would appear that no one is really coming to stop like lending platforms or say something like financial derivatives that are on chain. But that may change in the future, and there may be some aspects of coercion that are at play, but they can't just go turn the switch off like they could for a centralized exchange. So I don't think it's a huge risk not in terms of like what regulatory action will happen, but in terms of as somebody who wants to get a job at one of those types of projects, I think it's still something that, if it's within your risk appetite to be like, this might be a business model that's invalidated in some point in the next 10 years, potentially, then I would say go for it. But I don't think that there's an extant threat to your eligibility to be employed by that company at that time.
Yeah. Risk taking is definitely a big factor when you're looking to work in the blockchain crypto space.
Yeah, and that's something that you have to decide for yourself, like what kind of risk are you willing to take inside of crypto. And being in crypto itself has an aspect of risk. There are certainly safer industries out there, but I think a lot of people, most of crypto believes that we're here to stay, and it's not like this will all evaporate someday. It really can't be erased at this point. And so there are times, boom and bust cycles, and times when there's a lot of jobs and times when lots of people get laid off. But ultimately, I think that this is a long-term industry, and it would be worth it to investigate entering it if you're passionate about crypto.
Yeah, and it's very ideologically driven. People who are here really love what they're doing.
Mm-hmm. And another great thing is that ideology-wise, we've seen a huge diversification of ideologies and viewpoints over even the last year and a half. Like the NFT people who have come into the space recently have brought with them a totally new worldview that wasn't really here not too long ago. And similarly, the Ethereum community, I think, really sort of disrupted what was previously a Bitcoin mindset domination. And so these waves have been happening over the years, and it sort of is diversifying the ideologies that are out there. There are certain overarching principles that I think everyone adheres to, like financial inclusion. But in the specifics of different things, we've seen it diversify a ton over the last few years.
Totally, I agree. One final question. Which DAOs communities do you think would be best to work for right now?
I don't really think that I could list you specific DAOs off the top of my head to recommend working for. But one thing with DAOs is that because they're kind of a novel model of how people organize themselves, things may change over the next couple of years in terms of what it really means to be employed at a DAO. And so right now, a lot of DAOs are still bootstrapping themselves, but down the road, that might actually be something very different. And there might be, I think that you may see a transition to more of a one-off model of paying people to do things and maybe not paying people a salary. So it kind of depends.
Yeah.
It depends on what your viewpoint is long-term of what DAOs will look like. And I don't want to like give, the specific, like, I think these 6 DAOs are the best DAOs to work for. I'm not really in the business of like advertising specific projects, but I think that in general, they are really like a rapidly expanding industry, and they're going to be applied to a lot of things in crypto very quickly. And I think that they'll change in structure quite a bit, but it's a worthwhile sector to look into.
I think because they're so new, it's good to invest some time to experiment and like make your own judgment with your own research.
And also seeing if you can participate in the governance of earlier stage DAOs. I know that sometimes that's like a pretty high capital requirement, so may or may not always be the most possible thing. But if you can, then it's also something that could be a really interesting experience, both community-wise and towards future employment.
Yeah. Another question in the chat. Any website or organization to get training for blockchain that will help transition?
So if you're looking for technical skills, there's a number of Solidity courses out there. A free one that I actually have gone through myself is called Crypto Zombies. It's a very useful course. Probably some of you have done it as well. So that will teach you sort of the basics of Solidity, and then from there you can sort of you have enough information to start self-teaching. I found that Solidity is harder to self-teach than other languages because there's a lot more externalities you have to think about when you're programming smart contracts. So it makes it a bit more complicated. In terms of certifications outside of technical skills, to the best of my knowledge, those really don't exist yet. But hopefully through BAF, they'll be coming soon enough. Courses, there's a few courses at a few universities around the United States and perhaps in places like the United Kingdom as well. I know that I think Berkeley has a couple of courses. I've personally worked on the courses at NYU, so I know that there are 2 courses there, maybe 3 now. And I think MIT might have a course as well. So there's a few schools around the country that have those, but you really don't need them necessarily. I think that is something that is almost a little bit too early and is facing towards the next generation who hasn't even entered crypto at all yet. And that will really help bring them up to speed super quick. But if you're already deep in the space, it's really more about figuring out how you can demonstrate that you've been really engaged for a long time, and being able to say, if somebody asks you, like, what's your participation in crypto look like? It would be helpful to be able to say, like, I've participated in the governance of this and that protocol. I met all the criteria for these airdrops, and I know how to use lending services and dexes, and I was an early player of Axie Infinity or something like that. So having that ability to demonstrate that you've been interacting and connecting with those things really shows that like you truly understand them, because the way that the UX is for most things in crypto right now, you have to really like understand it to be like a power user of the product. It's not like in the regular tech world where you don't have to have the slightest idea of how networking works to interact with Facebook. It doesn't matter. But in crypto, you still have to have that kind of knowledge because the UX just isn't there yet. So being able to show that you've been interacting with and using all these projects for a long time is, I think, a really powerful way of demonstrating what you know. And right now, that's really all we have in crypto.
Yeah, having foundational knowledge is almost always required for no matter the job, whether technical or not. And many of these protocols actually provide incentives for people to learn and like take quizzes and read guides. Like Cameron dropped in the chat, the Near Certified Developer Program, where you get $500 for like finishing the developer course. And you can also like read guides and answer quizzes and get their token. There's the same thing on Gitcoin, I believe, where you also like answer quizzes that are very gamified and fun. So not only do you learn something, but you also have the financial incentive over there.
Yep, and I think CoinMarketCap is a similar project as well, but you earn something like graph tokens or something. I don't know why they chose that, but yeah, that's also another great way of getting engaged is finding those kinds of opportunities and really looking to take as many of those types of quizzes and short courses as they appear in the space and as they seem applicable to you. A lot of them are technical focused, and that's kind of that's like the most pragmatic vertical to try to target with that kind of material, but they'll expand as well into other sides.
Yeah. Cool. Thank you so much, Christian. That was super insightful, and I'm sure our audience learned a lot from you today.
Yeah, thanks for having me here. It's been a really enjoyable time.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I want to thank both of you, Noor, for taking the time to prepare all these amazing questions, and Christian for all of your insight. Yeah, for those interested in getting more involved, hit us up on our Discord. If you become you can become a free BAF member. This gives you access to our Discord. And you can become a core member by actually doing stuff with BAF, like organizing these sort of events, or even project management, writing content, helping the website, all this like good stuff. If you're new to the industry, I'd highly recommend doing this, like engaging in these types of ways, whether with BAF or other organizations. Discord definitely democratizes the access to a lot of this stuff. And hackathons, even if you're non-technical, there are roles for you in hackathons at times. Sometimes there's hackathons dedicated to non-technical people, so keep your eyes out for those. One that I would like to highlight is the World Blockchain Hackathon, which BAF will be co-organizing with the primary organizers of it. This is, hence the name, all around the world. And last year there was over 3,000 participants, which is super exciting. And yeah, they'll be running, I think it's in October. So more information to come. But besides that, we're going to hop into the networking components. If you want to stick around, just make sure to turn on your mic and camera. This is how, yeah, just like get to meet each other within the network. And we're going to take a break for the next 2 weeks on events. So just stay in touch via Discord, and then you'll also probably get our newsletter as well. Thanks again for coming, everybody.
Guys.